Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by
SBI Mutual Fund, a partner for life.
Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
Not be surprised by many things, given the history of human rights institutions.
Why wasn't Saddam Hussein entrusted with investigating Iraq's weapons of mass destruction? Why isn't Kim Jong-un put in charge of denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula? Why isn't Bashar al-Assad being asked to head a probe on the use of chemical weapons in Syria? Why doesn't Nicolas Maduro sit on an advisory panel on hunger and hyperinflation? What about Erdogan? Why doesn't he sit in judgment of press freedom? Why isn't Vladimir Putin being put in charge of investigating nerve agent attacks? It's common sense. Perpetrators cannot be the pronouncers of verdict. But this basic rule does not apply to the United Nations, which is why the UN Human Rights Council is set to have some illustrious new board members: China, Human Rights Council, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Cuba. Countries with a stellar human rights record will sit on the high table of the global body that vows to protect human rights. The system is so flawed and broken, criticizing it would be a waste of time. The presence of such countries in positions of authority not only makes a mockery of the system, they compromise it. Tonight we'll show you how rights violators put roadblocks in any action of the UNHRC. These countries evidently do not care about rights. Why then do they jostle for a place on the council? On Gravitas tonight we'll explain. Also on the show, Sri Lanka keeps piling on more Chinese loans. Colombo now wants a $700 million lifeline from Beijing to avoid defaults. China is still using pangolins despite promising a crackdown on their sale. The mammal that could be the source, one of the sources of the Wuhan virus, is being used to make traditional Chinese medicine. As the race to the White House enters its final lap, Donald Trump is back on the campaign trail, claiming he's now immune and even ready to kiss his supporters. All the updates coming up ahead. And can you lose weight through intermittent fasting? A new study says it might be a bad idea. But we begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
The International Monetary Fund today shared its latest World Economic Outlook report. While global economy is expected to contract by 4.4% this year, India, Spain and Italy are likely to witness double-digit GDP contraction. Johnson & Johnson has announced a temporary halt to its COVID-19 vaccine clinical trials. According to the pharmaceutical company, the decision was taken after one of the participants developed an unexplained illness. Russia has urged Armenia and Azerbaijan to immediately start observing the ceasefire agreed over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh region, as intense fighting between the two rivals casts fresh doubt over the accord. Armed forces from Belarus and Russia, as well as units from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, have started joint military drills at the Belarusian military base. More than 900 participants and 120 military units are expected to take part in the exercises. Jakarta police used tear gas on protesters amid a wave of demonstrations against the controversial new investment law, which critics say will threaten labour rights and harm the environment. Over 6,000 people have been arrested across Indonesia during violent protests in recent weeks. Belarus police have been authorized by the government to use combat weapons if required against anti-Lukashenko protesters. The use of live firearms would mark a major escalation in the two-month standoff between Lukashenko and protesters who have staged peaceful rallies against the disputed election results. Navy divers in Poland have started a 5-day operation to defuse the largest unexploded World War II bomb ever found in Poland. Dubbed the Earthquake Bomb, it was used by Britain's Royal Air Force and weighs nearly 5,400 kilograms. Firefighting efforts are still underway in Tanzania to extinguish a fire that has erupted on the slopes of the tallest mountain in Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro. Members of the Tanzanian National Parks Authority and locals have been racing against time to douse the fire. Five-time World Footballer of the Year Cristiano Ronaldo has become the biggest name in world of sport to test positive for COVID-19. Ronaldo has left the Portugal national squad and has entered self-isolation. Portugal captain Ronaldo returned a positive test ahead of the UEFA Nations League clash against Sweden on Wednesday in the pre-match screening test. The Portuguese Football Association says he has not shown any symptoms but has been sent home as a precaution. He now faces a race to be fit in time for a blockbuster Champions League clash against old rival Lionel Messi at the end of the month when Juventus take on Barcelona. Cycling's second Grand Tour of 2020, the Giro d'Italia, has been hit by an outbreak of COVID-19, with 2 teams pulling out of the race. Stage 10 of the tour, though, went ahead with the race organisers deciding that the numbers involved were too low to stop the race. Pre-race favourite Simon Yates had to abandon the race over the weekend after testing positive, and now 4 staff members belonging to his Mitchelton Scott team too tested positive. Another big name to test positive was Dutchman Steven Kruijswijk of Jumbo-Visma, who was just 1 minute and 24 seconds off the lead. Race organisers conducted 571 tests across Sunday and Monday, and a total of 8 cases came back positive.
The world's most inhumane regimes will now dictate the global rules for human rights. That is, if an election plays out the way many experts are predicting. The countries we're talking about are China, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Russia and Cuba, labelled as the world's biggest violators of human rights. Now they could be on the board of the UN Human Rights Council. China, Russia and Saudi Arabia are on the verge of a diplomatic victory. Pakistan and Cuba are vying for the remaining spots. The UNHRC, whose job it is to protect human rights around the world, could now fall into the hands of the world's biggest rights abusers. On Gravitas tonight, we'll tell you about the charade that is playing out at the United Nations Human Rights Council. But first, we must take a look at the UN resolution and what it says. Members elected to the Council shall uphold the highest standards in the promotion and protection of human rights. Do China, Russia and Saudi Arabia fit that description? Can you call Cuba and Pakistan guardians of human rights? Now let me tell you how they uphold the highest standards in the protection of human rights. And we'll start with China. Just a week ago, 39 countries around the world had slammed Beijing for human rights abuses against ethnic Uyghurs. They criticized China for its crackdown on Hong Kong's autonomy. Then we have Saudi Arabia. Last year, a United Nations appointed rights investigator blamed Saudi Arabia for the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. She said the murder was an act of quote-unquote international crime. Next is Russia. In March this year, a UN panel said Russia committed a war crime when it bombed Syrian civilian targets. And the less said about Cuba and Pakistan, the better. Two more contenders, both fitting the same description. Both have been named and shamed by the United Nations for rights violations. How can the UN then justify their appointment to the Rights Council board? Here's another question. What is the qualification to be a board member of such a panel? You may be interested in knowing that a country's track record on human rights has nothing to do with this appointment. At the United Nations Human Rights Council, international politics dictates these selections. The problem is with the system itself. The UN Human Rights Council is a subsidiary of the General Assembly. Another interesting point. The UNHRC was set up to replace the UN Commission on Human Rights. What was the need? The Commission had earned a bad reputation for similar reasons. And now the replacement is proving to be just as bad. This council has 47 members. They're all elected for 3-year terms. And these spots are given region-wise. The UN has specified groups, so they have 13 members from Africa, 13 from Asia Pacific, 6 from Eastern Europe, 8 from Latin America and the Caribbean, and the last 7 come from a group known as Western European and other states. The rules are very clear. Members must be picked by election, but rules aren't always followed. Nominations are settled through secret backroom deals. And this time, 15 seats are up for grabs, many of them uncontested. And going by most accounts, China, Russia and Saudi Arabia will easily secure a spot. Voting to fill up these spots happens through a secret ballot at the UN General Assembly in New York. And there's only one way a candidate can be defeated: when they receive less than 50% of the vote, which means less than 97 countries must vote in favor of them. A list of candidates that features countries like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and Cuba was bound to create an uproar. Human rights campaigners are now pleading with countries to defeat these rights violators. One of the prominent voices is of the Geneva-based NGO UN Watch. They say this situation, listen to this, and I'm quoting, this situation is like allowing 5 convicted arsonists to join the fire brigade.
UN decided that the worst abusers should not be there. Okay, so that is a decision made by the UN, and sadly, too often that is not being observed. But those are the rules of the UN, and they should be observed. Finally, I want to make a very important point, is that we've come to a point now in 2020 where we've had now 14 years of elections since 2006, and sadly, too often, most of the worst abusers get elected. So what does that mean? It means that we have something called elections, and the result is that most likely, let's be honest here, most likely China, Russia, Cuba, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia will be elected next week. And the result is that those countries can go around the world and say, look at me, I have a badge of approval. I've been elected to the UN Human Rights Council, the world's highest human rights body. There were elections, we were elected, and that happens.
You heard it for yourself. The United Nations created a system to fight human rights abuses. But that system is now being hijacked by rights abusers. By the way, China was already on the UNHRC board. It wants a re-election now. Saudi Arabia was on the council in 2019. Russia, too, was a member nearly 4 years ago. And both of these countries, Russia and Saudi Arabia, are looking at a comeback. Which brings us to yet another question. These countries don't care about human rights. Then why do they want a place on the Human Rights Council? Why do they want to flaunt that badge of membership? There are 2 reasons why. One, they want to deflect attention from their own record. They want to block criticism. And 2, they want to weaken the Council's ability to address any other global rights issues. Let me show you how this works. Burundi, considered one of the worst violators of human rights, was a member of this very same Rights Council. It served for 3 years, from 2015 to 2018. Now, in this 3-year period, Burundi blocked all resolutions against itself, which was only to be expected. But that's not all. It voted against every country resolution that came its way, every single one. Basically, it was blocking action against all violators. Now, the Human Rights Council was created in 2006, and in the last 14 years, China has served as a board member multiple times, and each time, China has deflected all criticism that came its way. It has also weakened the institution of the UNHRC. In 2017, China sponsored a resolution called Promoting Development Over Human Rights. What do you make of this, promoting development over human rights? It was a resolution that prioritized development over human rights. What does that mean? It means if the choice is between building a road and violating an individual's rights, you pick the road. And this is not surprising because this is China's template. And it shamelessly took it to the UNHRC. The resolution also tried to insert the Xi Jinping thought into the UN language. And guess what? China succeeded. It won the vote to pass this resolution by a comfortable margin. In 2018, China moved another resolution. This one was called Promoting Mutually Beneficial Cooperation in the Field of Human Rights. What could possibly be wrong with that? A lot. Through this resolution, China wanted to stop the practice of naming and shaming countries for violations, countries like China itself. It pushed for a softer mechanism. What Beijing wanted was for countries to adopt a state-led peer review process. The resolution passed, but only after significant edits were made to water down China's original text. And interestingly, a high number of countries abstained from voting on this resolution. In recent times, China has voted against resolutions on grave international crimes in countries like Syria, Yemen, and Myanmar. This is how institutions are weakened and compromised. The members of the United Nations Human Rights Council should represent its values. The members should believe in human rights. The UNHRC in its present form is only copying its failed predecessor. The Commission for Human Rights. Countries with records of abuses like torture, extrajudicial killings, political imprisonment and disappearances were its members. An editorial of the New York Times in 2006 had called this body, and I'm quoting, the shame of the United Nations. Why? Because it had China, Russia, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan as its members. The very same countries look set to join the board of the UN Human Rights Council. Why leave out Kim Jong-un of North Korea, we say? It would complete the quorum. Ultimately, it's all about gaining more power on the world stage. Power that allows nations to shape the world in their own vision. Countries use different tools to gain power. Some use their position at global bodies, others use money to dictate terms. China is using both. It wants a seat on the high table. Its checkbooks to buy silence and compliance. Take the case of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is looking for a financial lifeline to avoid defaults. And instead of going to the IMF, the Rajapaksas dialed Beijing. They made another request for a loan, and they're pushing their country deeper into Chinese debt. Our next report tells you more.
This visit is more than a photo op. When China's top diplomat Yang Jiechi visited Colombo, he was greeted by the Sri Lankan president, no less. Why? Because the Rajapaksas want a financial lifeline from China. According to a report, Sri Lanka needs cash to service more than $15 billion worth of debt. Negotiations are underway for a new loan. Another $700 million to add to Sri Lanka's giant pile of debt. This is the third loan request by Colombo to Beijing this year. First, China granted an urgent loan of $500 million to Sri Lanka for the fight against the Wuhan virus. By May, the Sri Lankan cabinet wanted to borrow another $80 million to improve 105 kilometers of roads. With this latest request, China seems to have become a lender of last resort for Sri Lanka. The country's external debt is mounting. According to an estimate in April, Sri Lanka owes close to $3 billion to its lenders this year alone. By 2018, Sri Lanka's debt to China stood at $5 billion in total. Considering the new loan requests, those numbers will only grow by the end of this year. By reaching out to China for help, Colombo seems to be ditching the International Monetary Fund. This is a major shift. In the last 55 years, Sri Lanka has reached out to the IMF 16 times for a bailout. But the island country has had a complex history with the lender. Sri Lanka has completed only 9 out of 16 IMF programs. In recent years, Chinese lenders have swooped in to replace the IMF. In 2018, Sri Lanka secured a $1 billion syndicated loan from China Development Bank. According to another report, the Bank of China agreed to give a $1 billion loan to Colombo last year. The Wuhan virus outbreak has dented Sri Lankan government revenues. Credit ratings agencies have downgraded Sri Lanka, leaving the country with few options to borrow funds. Sri Lanka finds itself in a debt trap. It is borrowing more money to repay existing lenders, doubling down and piling on more Chinese debt. If Colombo continues on this path, it could meet the fate of Pakistan, and China will have another vassal state in South Asia. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Our next report tells you about another broken promise by China. In the early months of the pandemic, China banned the use of pangolin scales in medicine. Illegal wildlife trade was identified as a pandemic trigger by scientists. Has China stopped it? A new report says pangolin scales are still being used in traditional Chinese medicine. Take a look at how China is circumventing its own ban.
An endangered animal is being hunted to extinction in China. The pangolin, said to be the world's most trafficked mammal. China's obsession with pangolins is centuries old. Its meat is prized as a delicacy, and the scales are used in traditional medicine. There's nothing legal about any of this. China's pangolin trade is in defiance of a global ban. But to many Chinese, that's what makes it exciting. 200,000 pangolins are consumed in Asia every year. Chinese traditional medicine is the biggest consumer. Pangolin scales are like a panacea for the Chinese. It is believed to improve blood circulation, cure impotence, and increase lactation. Tall claims, but medically unproven. Earlier this year, China appeared to have a change of heart. Pangolin scales were banned from use in traditional medicine. It was partially due to mounting evidence that pangolins were carriers of coronavirus strains. The world community was upbeat. Conservationists were drawing up plans to revive the pangolin population. But this is China. Things are never as straightforward as they seem. A UK-based environmental group has busted China's deception. Pangolin scales are still being used in traditional medicine, and China is making no efforts to hide it. 221 companies have been licensed to use pangolin scales. You can find their products on e-commerce sites like eBay. So was China lying about the ban? Technically, no. Pangolin scales were removed from a list of so-called key ingredients, but they can still be used to make patent medicines. These are drugs approved for commercial production by the Chinese government. 8 such drugs are still in circulation. But what about sourcing? Where do these companies get pangolins from? It's a question best posed to the Chinese government. Beijing permits companies to use pangolin scales from its national stockpile. Very little is known about this buffer. It is described as shrouded in mystery and never-ending. What's more, China's medical insurance system continues to cover remedies involving pangolin scales. In short, China was never serious about curbing pangolin trade. It was an effort to appease the international community. This is not just limited to pangolins. China continues to be the hub of illegal wildlife trade, an industry worth around $20 billion. But China is playing a dangerous game. Wet markets and slaughterhouses are breeding grounds for viruses. They have already unleashed 2 major outbreaks in the world, claiming tens of thousands of lives. Which brings us to the question, why is China reluctant to curb wildlife trade? The answer is, it's a game of appeasement. Exotic meat is consumed mostly by China's elite, a group that the communist leadership is unwilling to antagonize. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
China will make weapons. China will sell weapons. China will also broadcast videos of its military drills. And in the name of border security, China will provoke its neighbors. But if another country buys arms, the dragon will breathe fire. Case in point, Taiwan. China has threatened the United States with quote-unquote legitimate and necessary response. Response to what? Selling arms to Taiwan. Washington is selling advanced weaponry to Taipei. The White House is moving forward with 3 such sales, and Beijing wants Washington to stop them immediately. Why? The dragon says, follow one China policy.
China urges the United States to realize the perniciousness of arms sales to Taiwan, strictly abide by the One China principle and rules of the 3 joint communications. It must immediately cancel any arms sale plan and terminate sales and contact with Taiwan. China will make legitimate and necessary response as the situation develops.
You heard the Chinese spokesperson. What gives China the right to command another country, tell another country who it should and shouldn't sell arms to? China clearly does not understand the concept of sovereignty. It displayed complete ignorance of the concept on the 7th of October too. Beijing lectured WION on how to report on China. The press secretary of the Chinese embassy in Delhi issued this letter. Do not violate the One China principle, it said, adding that Taiwan should not be referred to as a country, nation or Republic of China. This letter moved no one. And China's warning on the US arms sale too is likely to fall on deaf ears. It's high time Beijing realized that while it may be stuck to the illusion of a one China policy, Taipei has moved on. Today, it is independent of the mainland. It has its own president, its own air force and an army. Taiwan also has the right to secure its border and buy weapons. FYI, here's what Taiwan is buying from the US. Reports say there are at least 7 major weapon systems. So far, informal notifications have been issued for 3 of them. A truck-based rocket launcher made by Lockheed Martin. It is called a High Mobility Artillery Rocket System. There's also a long-range air-to-ground missile made by Boeing. It is called the SLAM-ER. The third notification ID for external sensor pods for F-16s. They allow real-time transmission of imagery and data from the aircraft to ground stations. In the pipeline are drones, anti-ship missiles, underwater mines, etc. And all of these sales await formal notification to Congress. There are no suggestions of either Taiwan or the US buckling under Chinese threats. So the last thing China should be doing is talking about principles and who and what others should be doing. Look at what Beijing is up to in the East China Sea. Chinese vessels have intruded into Japanese waters. They have been sticking around the Senkaku Islands for a record time. Japan's top government spokesperson had to flag the situation at a press conference and ask the Chinese vessels to leave Japanese waters.
The 2 Chinese vessels that invaded Japan's territorial waters around the Senkaku Islands are still in the territorial waters. It's now 10:47 a.m., so it's regrettable that this situation has continued for more than 2 days. In the sea, Japan Coast Guard patrol boats repeatedly requested to Chinese vessels to leave the territorial waters.
Like you heard, the Chinese vessels have been near the Senkaku Islands for 2 days. The Senkakus are Japanese territory. Tokyo has been administering them since 1972, but China calls these islands, its quote-unquote, inherent territories, whatever that means. Beijing has been trying to assert its claim over the Senkaku Islands. It refers to them as Diaoyu. In July, Chinese vessels intruded into Japanese waters for 3 hours and 23 minutes. These are one of the many examples of how China has time and again violated the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea. Beijing is a party to this treaty, and yet its maritime activities undermine the status quo at the East China Sea and the South China Sea. This is not the only international treaty, by the way, that China is violating. On what ground, then, does China demand that the world abide by its one China policy? A major power struggle is unfolding in Malaysia. The players are opposition leader Anwar Ibrahim and Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin. The opposition has submitted a set of documents to the Malaysian king. Documents they claim will prove their majority in parliament. So who holds the edge in this race, and what options does the king have? Here's a report.
Malaysia's opposition leader is a man on a mission. 73-year-old Anwar Ibrahim has been eyeing the country's premiership for 22 years, 10 of which he spent in jail. Could this finally be his time in the spotlight? Here's how the story unfolded. In 2018, Anwar and Mahathir Mohamad joined forces. Together, they ended the 6-decade rule of the United Malays National Organization. Mahathir became Prime Minister. Anwar was his designated successor. But in February this year, the alliance fell apart. Anwar blamed Mahathir and his supporters for not transferring power to him. After the government resigned, the king appointed Muhyiddin Yassin as the new Prime Minister. But Anwar Ibrahim would not be denied. Last month, he launched a bid for the premiership again, claiming to have the support of 122 out of the 220 legislators. All that was left to do was meet the king and present the evidence. The meeting was slated 3 weeks ago, but was postponed after the king's hospitalization. On Tuesday, Anwar was finally granted an audience. He presented the king with documents that supposedly prove his majority in parliament.
With these documents, it is abundantly clear that we have registered a formidable, convincing majority in parliament, or among parliamentarians. Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin has lost his majority and therefore would be appropriate for him to resign.
The next couple of weeks will be crucial in this power struggle. The king is expected to consult leaders from other parties before making a decision. While Anwar appears to be confident of a smooth sailing, not everyone agrees. The 3 weeks delay in his meeting with the king may have changed the balance of power. The Muhyiddin camp may have lured back defectors in this period of time. Even otherwise, the possibility of the king dissolving parliament looms large. But if the king does appoint Anwar as prime minister, it would be one of the greatest political comebacks the world has ever seen. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
US President Donald Trump does not understand the severity of the pandemic, and there's no better way to say this. Trump tested positive for the Wuhan virus just 11 days ago. He was released from hospital just 7 days ago, and he's already back on the campaign trail. He held an election rally near Orlando in Florida. He threw his mask into the crowd. Trump said he's immune to the Wuhan virus and will kiss everyone in the audience. I'm not even making this up. I'm not joking. Listen to this.
I went through it. Now they say I'm immune. I feel so powerful. I'll walk into that audience. I'll walk in there. I'll kiss everyone in that audience. I'll kiss the guys and the beautiful women and everybody. I'll just give you a big fat kiss. No, but there is something nice. I don't have to be locked up in my basement, and I wouldn't allow that to happen anyway. I wouldn't allow it to happen. When you're the president, you can't lock yourself in a basement and say, I'm not going to bother with the world. You got to get out, and it's risky. It's risky, but you got to get out. But it does give you a good feeling when you can beat something, and now they say you're immune. I don't know for how long. Some people say for life. Some people say for 4 months. I mean, every time I think about it, every time I hear them, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter because they want it to be as bad as possible.
It's neither for life nor 4 months. There isn't enough scientific evidence to prove that being infected with the Wuhan virus means you will not contract it for the second time. In fact, people have tested positive for the second time. And I'll not get into the science behind all of this because none of us know enough about the virus. But what I can tell you is that it is extremely unpresidential to risk people's lives and spread fake news about this virus, especially when not much has been made public about Donald Trump's own health. The White House first said the president is risk-free. There was no mention of whether Trump had tested negative. When Trump's doctor confirmed that the president is negative, he did not mention the dates on which the tests were conducted. The only thing that is clear amid all of this confusion is this. Donald Trump is desperate to step out. The presidential election is barely 21 days away. Trump has already lost a lot of time and polls are not looking great for him. The upcoming rallies are his last shot at re-election, and some say it may already be too late. Did you know that 10 million votes have already been cast in early polls? And I'm referring to data from the US Election Project. It says as of Monday night, nearly 10.4 million Americans have cast their votes. There are a total of 200 million eligible voters. At least 150 million of them are expected to vote this year. And if that prediction holds true, it means around 7% of votes have already been cast. In 2016, 57.2 million Americans voted early. 1/5 of this number has already been reached, with 21 days still to go. What does this high turnout mean for the Trump campaign? It means that the president's denouncement of mail-in voting has not worked. It does not help Trump that opinion polls show him trailing Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Biden has a 10-point lead nationally. Does that mean that Donald Trump is going to lose the election? No, it doesn't. Hillary Clinton had a clear lead over Donald Trump in polls, but she ended up losing in the Electoral College. So it's the swing states that one needs to look at to gauge the upcoming election. I'm talking about states like Florida, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Arizona, Wisconsin, Iowa. These states will have a big say in who wins the November 3rd election. Will it be Trump or Biden? A Guardian poll claims that Biden is leading all swing states except Ohio and Iowa. It was in Ohio that Biden was holding a campaign rally yesterday. He told the crowd that America should have no tolerance for white supremacist groups.
I know this nation is strong enough to both honestly face systemic racism and strong enough to provide safe streets for our families and small businesses that too often bear the brunt of looting and burning, which is never justified. We have no need, though, for armed militia roaming the streets. We should have no tolerance for extremist white supremacist groups menacing our communities.
Donald Trump, by the way, won Ohio by 8 percentage points 4 years ago and must win the state to win the re-election. A quick FYI, no Republican has won the White House without carrying Ohio. On Monday, Trump's website said it is thrilled to see Joe Biden wasting a valuable day by visiting a state he cannot win. Have you heard of intermittent fasting? It's quite a fad these days. From celebrities to Silicon Valley CEOs, everyone is trying their luck with intermittent fasting. The eating pattern expects you to fast anywhere between 12 to 18 hours a day and eat only in the remaining window. It's supposed to make you lose weight. It's also being pitted as the elixir for a long life. Forget that. A new study says intermittent fasting does not even help you shed pounds. Here's a report.
Intermittent fasting is the new keto. It is such a fad. From Instagram influencers to actor Hugh Jackman and Jennifer Aniston, everyone is a fan. As the name suggests, intermittent fasting is about eating in intervals. For example, you eat for 8 hours a day and fast for the remaining 16. In return, you are promised weight loss, a healthy heart, lower insulin resistance, reduction of inflammation, and believe it or not, a longer lifespan. What makes intermittent fasting a hit is that in the 8 hours of eating, you are allowed to eat anything. A lot of people are taking up this challenge and documenting their journey.
At first, I would get really hungry, but after a while, my body adjusted.
It's not as easy to follow. You have to have the right discipline.
There are apps helping people monitor their fast. In 2019, intermittent fasting was the top trending diet search on Google. All the hype, and what if someone told you intermittent fasting does not help you lose weight? Well, that's what a study has found. Leading it was a cardiologist from the University of California, San Francisco. He and his team recruited 116 people who were either overweight or obese. They were divided into two groups. One ate at random times within a strict 8-hour window. The other group ate at normal meal times. The group that was intermittent fasting lost an average of 2 pounds over 12 weeks. The group that was not fasting lost 1.5 pounds. Researchers said this difference was not statistically significant. To top that, some of the people who were fasting lost more muscle mass. So are we asking you to stop intermittent fasting? Not at all. The point we are trying to make is that not all fads are scientifically proven. A 2018 study found no significant difference between intermittent fasting for 50 weeks and following a traditional diet with restricted calories. A cardiologist who studied intermittent fasting experimented with it for 7 years. But there are others who have lost weight. The list includes Chris Pratt, Kourtney Kardashian, Vanessa Hudgens, and Scarlett Johansson. People began adapting intermittent fasting after several studies showed results on mice. If mice lost weight, could humans be far behind? Maybe not. But where is the proof? We aren't lab mice. Should we experiment with our bodies? Bureau Report, WION World is One.
K-pop sensation BTS is the latest target of China's propaganda machine. A recent statement by the 7-member boy band is being criticized by the Chinese state media. A statement which China says negates the history of the Korean War and insults the sentiments of Chinese citizens. But does it? Our next report will help you understand.
Record-setting views, colossal album purchases, and a global fan following. K-pop phenomenon BTS is without question the most popular boy band in recent history. Its songs are known for their inclusiveness than any overt provocation or political remarks. But a recent statement by the 7-member band has triggered a barrage of criticism in China. Their pre-recorded acceptance speech for receiving the Van Fleet Award has angered many Chinese netizens.
We will always remember the history of pain that our two nations share together and the sacrifices of countless men and women. After 70 years, the world we were living in is much closer than before, and boundaries in many aspects are getting more blurred. As members of the global community, we should build a deeper understanding and solidarity to be happier together. In pursuit of this cause, BTS will always remind ourselves of the meaning of the Van Fleet Award and keep doing our best in all that we do.
This was the band's leader, RM. He took the opportunity to thank Korean War veterans for their service as the peninsula marks the 70th anniversary of the Korean War. He acknowledged the shared suffering of Americans and Koreans during the war. Not once did he mention the Chinese regime. The Chinese social media is filled with outrage. Thousands are registering their offense against the band for not recognizing the role of Chinese soldiers who fought alongside North Korea. Fueling the outrage is the Chinese state media, with statements like these. The Global Times says the band's one-sided attitude to the Korean War has hurt feelings as it negates history. The controversy has progressed to the diplomatic stage. The Chinese Foreign Ministry is up in arms.
I have also noticed the relevant reports and the reaction of Chinese netizens to this matter. What I want to say is that it should be our common pursuit to take history as a mirror, face the future, cherish peace, and promote friendship. It is worth our joint efforts.
As the criticism turns political, merchandise, products and advertisements featuring BTS are being taken down from Chinese e-commerce platforms. 3 prominent bands have removed any trace of their collaborations with the band. BTS edition smartphones and earphones manufactured by Samsung have disappeared. BTS edition sportswear manufactured by Italian sports brand Fila are nowhere to be found. And the Hyundai Motor Group too has removed all ads and references to the band from its social media accounts in China.
Sing it out loud.
The calls for an all-out boycott of the band are on the rise. But the South Korean Foreign Ministry is still promising to uphold the existing bond between the two nations.
The government is monitoring the issue with interest so that it does not affect mutual understanding and bond between South Korean and Chinese people. In addition, we will continue to make efforts to develop the South Korea-China relationship and promote ties between the two countries.
After diplomats, activists and journalists, artists have now become the latest victim of China's political correctness and fervent nationalism. How long can the world afford to dance to China's whims? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Wrapping the show with that, leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.